Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez, and I am an editor for LatAm List, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on LatAmList.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Manuel Olguín, CEO of Keynua, an electronic signature provider that has the added component of identity verification through facial recognition. Keynua is part of YCombinator's 2019 winter batch and has also received investment from Magma Partners. They talk about how Manuel combined his love of tech and his experience in the movie industry to found his first startup, Cinepapaya, at a time when LatAm's ecosystem was very different from what it is today. They also discuss how Manuel found a solution to his own frustrations with the notary market in Latin America by founding Keynua. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Manuel Olguín.
Hey, Manuel, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being willing to do it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Where are you in the world today?
Well, right now I'm in Spain. I'm in a small coastal town to the south of Barcelona called Sitges. I usually come here every summer because my wife is from Barcelona. My first two kids were born here, and they visit my wife's family. But I was going back to Lima, where I'm originally from and where the business is based, this week, but all the flights were suspended. So I'm pretty much stuck here for the next 2 weeks until the next flight becomes available.
So tell me a little bit about Keynua. What do you do?
So Keynua is an electronic signature provider with the added component of identity verification. And this perhaps doesn't sound that appealing or interesting or relevant in the US or Europe or in other markets, but in Latin America, it's a very important thing. You really need to verify who's signing a document, and it needs to be done in a very strict manner. And so that's basically what we do. We verify the identities of the signers, and we do it via facial recognition.
So when we first met, and had a phone call and I heard the problem you were trying to solve, I think I told you on the first call we wanted to invest because my life had been, I think I spent hours and hours and hours over my 10 years in Latin America sitting in line at notaries, and not to mention the thousands of dollars that I've spent on notarizing documents. So talk a little bit about the problem, like the reality on the ground of what does it look like to sign a document in Latin America, both in terms of time and cost, and what does it look like with your product?
Yeah, so you have to start out by knowing that electronic signatures are not that widespread in Latin America as they are in the US. And you also have the notarial problem, which you've touched upon. So basically, most documents are still signed with a wet signature, and some important documents must also be signed before notary public, which is a different thing than what you have in the US, for example, where anybody can be a notary public and you just go there, pay $5 or $10 or whatever, and you get the document signed and stamped. In Latin America, it's lawyers who usually are notaries, and it's a very cumbersome experience. So if you want to have like a parallel or a good example of what it looks like, imagine going to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, standing in line for about half an hour, and then just waiting for somebody to put a stamp on your paper. That's how it looks like. And for us, it's something that slows down everything. It slows down business, and it slows down just people agreeing on transactions. So although that was the main thing we wanted to change in the region, we started out by just doing e-signatures in a way that was relevant, in a way that solved the problem in Latin America. And in most countries, even in wet signatures, you always give the document, signed document, and you hand in a photocopy of your ID. So that's just standard practice, not in e-signatures, just in every type of signature, you always have to hand in a photocopy of your ID because they need to know who's signing. So what we've done is we've taken this standard process and we've done it electronically. So in Keynua, you don't sign with a normal handwritten signature, you sign with a video signature. So it's basically a 3 to 4 second video of the signatory saying out loud a specific code. And this code is extracted from the actual content of the document. So we hash the document. That hash is like a big number. We condense it to 6 numbers. And that's what you have to say out loud when you're signing the document. So that's how you relate the document with the actual speaking out loud of the code. And then we get 2 things out of that short video. We get the approval of the document because you're saying a specific code. You can equate it to the PIN of the document, but we also get the visual identity of who's approving that document. We get a video that we can break down into small frames, and then we compare those frames to your picture ID via facial recognition. And when we have the option, which this is something that's available in certain countries, Brazil, Peru, for example, we connect to the official identity database of that country, and we take out the picture, the official picture, and we compare it, and we see if that's the person who should be signing. So that basically that's how Keynua works. It's changing a little bit the paradigm, the way documents are signed. You know, we use video signatures instead of normal handwritten signatures.
We're going to go much deeper into this problem and the business in a few minutes here, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about your background. So you're based with your company in Peru. Where are you from originally?
So I'm from Peru originally. I've lived all over the place, Europe and the US primarily, but I was raised in Peru until I was 14 years old. Then I've lived in Switzerland for a few years. I've lived in the US for many years, in Spain as well. And then I moved back to Peru about 14 years ago. And that's when I started just getting into different startups.
Did you know that you always wanted to be an entrepreneur, or was it something that came up in your business career?
I think it's something that came up. I've always had the bug, you know, the willingness to do things in a different manner and to try new things. But until I started with the first company I founded, I just worked for different companies, different technology companies, both in the US and in Europe. And then once I came back to Peru, I wanted to try my luck at doing it by myself, basically.
And what was your first business?
So the first successful business was Cinepapaya, which was a movie ticketing company. Before that, I founded also a few other businesses, mainly in marketplace type of businesses, which didn't work out. And one of the startups that did work out was Cinepapaya, which sold movie tickets in all of Latin America. We started in Peru with a small movie theater, just with 5 screens. And then we expanded that into more than 12 countries, ended up selling for more than 5,000 screens in all of Latin America.
So you mentioned that you had tried your hand at a couple of marketplaces and it didn't really work out. What lessons did you learn from that experience that you took into Cinepapaya to make it successful?
I think speed was one of the lessons that we learned. We were just going very slow with the first couple of businesses and sort of waiting for, it was a B2B businesses, so we were waiting for the companies that we were contacting us, that we were contacting to reply faster, and we just didn't expand our pipeline of new leads fast enough. And this changed once we went into Cinepapaya. So we started contacting all of the movie theaters in the region instead of only doing Peru. That's the other thing we learned very quickly. The first few businesses were basically focused on Peru. And Cinepapaya was born with a regional ambition from the start. So we decided to go for Peru, Chile, and Colombia. And then we added new countries as we scaled.
Why did you decide to start Cinepapaya instead of any other business you could have decided to start?
I think it was mainly out of my own personal professional experience. So I started out in a internet portal. I don't know if you recall or not. It was called UPI. It was based in Miami, and it was at the beginning of in 2000, sort of 1999, 2000. just before the dot-com crash. And there were a few portals, Terra, UP, a few others. So I started there, and that's my first involvement with technology. I was an editor, but I also was like the liaison between the technology department and the content department. So I learned about the internet and just digital businesses from that experience. And then I also worked in a movie distribution and production company in Spain for about 5 years. It was a movie studio. So I put those two things together, my love of technology and my experience in the movie industry. And I came up with something that combined both. And initially, it wasn't movie tickets. It was more like a Netflix for Latin America. But we realized that it was going to be tougher than we thought. And Netflix also entered Latin America as we were finishing up our product. So we decided to go for something within the same space, which was movies, but in a different angle, which was exhibition or ticketing.
That must have been really hard to devote a bunch of time to building out the product that you wanted to build, and then have Netflix come into the market, the big kind of bully in the market. And that's an experience that I think a lot of founders have had. How did you decide to pivot out of that original business into the ticketing business? And what advice would you give to other founders when maybe their idea gets started on by a huge competitor?
Yeah, well, in our case, one of the strategies we had adopted from the start was in developing a lot of movie-related content, because we wanted to have that movie-related content be the magnet to draw in people that then wanted to stream movies or just buy movies through our system. So we already had all of that in our database. We had a lot of just synopsis, trailers, actor biographies. So that's something that was an asset that we had. And when we decided to completely pivot from a streaming service into a movie ticketing service, we sort of gathered around and said, okay, what do we have that could be useful within the same space? And that jumped at us immediately. You know, we had a lot of movie related content, and we said, well, we could use this for something similar. And then we just looked at the landscape of what was happening in Latin America. And basically, there were only a couple of exhibitors selling movies by themselves, but all the others were not. So there was no movie ticketer, online movie ticketer in the region. There were individual movie theaters selling their own tickets, but there were just a handful of them. So we just approached in our own city, the first one we thought of, and pitched them on the idea. They liked it. We didn't even have a product. We sold on blueprints. We sold them what we hadn't even developed yet, and they liked it. So we started from there, and then started having more movie theaters use our system. So that's how we made that pivot.
In 2012, 2013, when you were just getting started, was a pretty different era in the LatAm tech ecosystem compared to today, and just in terms of number of companies and money available for fundraising. Talk a little bit about what it was like then and how you were able to build the business and do fundraising.
Well, we started with accelerators. I mean, although the three founders were familiar with the Silicon Valley scene, and we had been to San Francisco and met some investors there initially, nobody in 2012 was investing, outside a 10-mile radius from their office, and Latin America wasn't even on the radar for them. So we were lucky enough to be there at a time where there were a few accelerators like YDA, for example, which now has a different focus on the region. But at that time, they were just accepting applications, and we applied, and we were accepted. So we got I remember $50,000 from them. We also applied to Startup Chile, and we also got some funding from them. So basically, we funded ourselves with accelerators and our own money as well, right? So we invested our own money in the business. And then we were lucky enough to have 500 startups be one of the early investors. I met Beji Yang in Bogota, I think in 2013, or somewhere around that time, and she also decided there that she wanted to invest in the business. So we had a few accelerators invest early, and that was what we had available to us at the time.
And as you started to build the business and expanded out of Peru, what was it like to be doing multiple countries in that era when I think fewer startups in the region were trying to do multiple countries at once?
For us, it wasn't that hard because basically we expanded into a country in a very light mode. We didn't do ticketing initially. We expanded with content. So the first thing we did when we were going into a new country is we got all the show times for the whole country. And the show times you could get just by writing emails to the exhibitors and telling them, okay, send me your show time for the week and I'll post it on my website. So they send you an Excel sheet that you had to manually input into your system. And we did that for every single movie theater in Colombia, in Chile, in Mexico, in all of the countries where we initially scaled to. But it wasn't a big outlay of money or having an individual or a specific team in that country. So we could do it remotely just by starting with showtimes. And that already gave us a foothold on the country because we would start to get some traffic of people that were interested in movies and in knowing the right showtimes for the movies, which nowadays it sounds like such an easy thing. But back then, the only way you could get the showtimes was by buying the newspaper and looking at the newspaper or just looking online at the digital version of the newspaper. And these were always outdated. The wrong times were there. So just by having a very good service that gave very precise showtimes for the region, that was a big step. Once we did that, then we started talking to the exhibitors and told them, well, we have this platform where we already have a lot of traffic, people that are interested in movies and in buying tickets, but we're not selling tickets. So the next step was for us to have the exhibitors join us and then start selling tickets with us. And then that's when we made a bigger investment and perhaps hired a country manager, and we're a little bit went a little bit more aggressive on the business development. But the initial expanding to another country was not that complicated for us, or we did it in a way that wasn't complicated.
One of the knocks on the LatAm ecosystem is the lack of exits, and you had one. You and your team built a business that ended up getting acquired. Talk a little bit about that process and what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs in the region that are looking to build something that will have value to somebody who will come in and buy it?
Well, I think you shouldn't start by thinking of who should acquire you. I mean, that's for me at least, it's the wrong way to look at things. You should start by thinking what's the biggest business I could build in the region, and what's the biggest problem I could solve in my specific area. You know, in our area was ticketing, movie related stuff, and we saw a big void there. So that's what we were looking for. Eventually, we weren't the ones who reached out to Fandango, which was the company who bought us. You know, they came to us through a contact, but the business was already well established in the region, and it was a quick way for them to enter the region and save a lot of time in business development. And also, I think an important thing in Latin America is the local knowledge or know-how that you need. And sometimes you can underestimate the importance of it. And for us, building the relationships with each individual exhibitor was our biggest asset, because I had personally traveled to every country in Latin America and met all of the exhibitors in person. So that gives you a good relationship with your direct clients. And basically that's what other companies who acquire you are buying. They're buying that network of relationships and the footprint you already have in the region. So I think the best advice is try to build the best business you can, try to build the best relationships you can with your clients or partners. And that's what has value. It has value for the immediate business, but it also has value for whoever might be thinking of acquiring you.
So moving into Keynua, why did you decide to start this business after having a success in entertainment and ticketing? Why this business rather than anything else you could have done?
So it wasn't something thought out as what type of business should I get into that might be huge or that might be valuable. It was more like everything, a personal problem that we felt. In the case of Keynua, while we were scaling Cinepapaya across the region, we felt, in our own flesh, the problems of signing documents with our lawyers everywhere. We saw how our U.S. based legal team would send us the documents docu-signed or hello signed or whatever, and when we were talking to the offices we had in Colombia or in Mexico or in Chile, we were not only sending physically signed documents, wet signatures, but sometimes the law required us to put a notary stamp on it, and that would take weeks. So that comparison of how things were done in one country and how things were done in the rest of Latin America, that's what prompted us to say, okay, this eventually will change. I mean, it has to change. And there will be companies that work on it, and why not us? So that's how we decided to enter into the e-signature business out of a problem felt by us with notaries, with signing documents, and so we started to think about ways of solving this problem. And although we initially focused more on replacing the notaries in Latin America, the idea slowly shifted into, first, you have to gain trust in something that's very standard, which is signing documents and identifying the people that sign those documents, which are two of the things that notaries do. But in the end, you're fighting for the customer's trust. And so far as they trust you, they'll use your system. So that's how the idea came about. It was out of our own problems in dealing with documents and signing documents in the region.
Yeah, the signing process is something that really, if you haven't been in the region, it's pretty hard to understand, and just how big of an industry this is. And I remember talking to you when we first were learning about the business, and talked about how big this market is and how much money gets spent on notaries and document signatures in the region. Talk a little bit about the size of this market.
Well, it's a huge market. I mean, just in terms of amount of notaries that are in the region, it's thousands. The market is at least $5 to $10 billion just in the e-signature side of it. If you contemplate the fees that get paid to notaries, that's even bigger. I mean, it's a huge chunk of the economy, and much of it goes through notaries. And some things we're replacing. Because you have two types of notary transactions in Latin America. Those that are compulsory, which are like, for example, if you're buying a house or you're transferring a vehicle, the law forces you to go through a notary. There's no two ways about it. And that, I would guess, could be perhaps 30% of the whole notary transactions that take place in the region. But then you also have another type of notary transaction, which is done by people that just want to make sure that something doesn't get altered, that you have witnesses to a specific transaction taking place, and that you have the guarantee that if something goes wrong, you'll be able to take that to a judge or to a court, and they'll see that the parties that were involved in that transaction were the ones that are on the paper. So those type of notary transactions are done more out of a need for security than out of the compulsory aspect of the law. And those are the ones we're going after initially. And those can be easily replaced by technology. So you can replace the identity part of what notaries do with facial recognition, and that's what we do. And then you can replace the immutability of the document to make sure that it doesn't get changed after you've signed it. You can replace it with just hashing technology, cryptography, blockchain, and that's what we also offer our clients. So initially, we're going after those types of transactions, but eventually our aim is to try to replace as much as possible, while offering just a standard e-signature service for the region so that people don't have to go anywhere. You just do it from your house. And this was a nice to have a few months ago. Now it's a must have for the last 2 or 3 months, because people just can't leave their houses. So we've seen a huge growth for our business in the last 4 months.
Yeah, Diego Caicedo from Omnibank would always talk about how Latin America is a trustless society, meaning that nobody trusts each other. And that's why that 70% of those documents that don't by law need a notary signature end up with a notary signature. So the core problem I see from that Keynua was solving here is that it's the trust layer on top of all of these 70% of documents that don't actually need a third party witness and verifier, but that people just want it.
Of course, yeah, that's our same take on it, and you have the tools to make those transactions transparent to everybody, and verifiable overall. So that's where we're going after.
When you started, you decided to apply to YCombinator. Talk about that decision and then the YC experience.
Yeah, well, I personally had a good experience with accelerators before, as I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, and I thought, well, we might as well go the same route this time, not only because of the funding that you get, but because of the testing your idea with people that have seen many types of ideas and can sort of read through the things that don't work. So that was part of the incentive as well. And we went for YCombinator because they give you a certain stamp that allows you to raise funds in an easier manner, and we live that. I mean, for us to raise the amount of money that we did with YCombinator, we did that like in 3 weeks, and with Cinepapaya, it took us 3 years to do the same fundraising. So yeah, the name that did help us, and above all, the network that they have and the investors. So you can just share your idea, show what you're working on, and have the investors come to you. So that's why we made that decision.
And since YC, what's gone on in the business? How have you started to solve the problem?
Okay, so we started out as where we are based in Lima, mainly with fintech companies, because those companies have a real need to verify the identities of their clients, of their users, especially fintechs that are in the lending scene. They have a specific amount of fraud that they get, people taking up loans in the name of other people. They have perhaps also, in some cases, a low repayment of certain loans that they hand out. So we saw a real hair on fire type problem there. So we went after those types of companies, fintechs, and we started in Lima. Then we started to progress onto other types of financial entities, like banks, which we're working with right now, a few banks. But then we were surprised that we started getting interest from other types of companies. So companies in the cosmetics sectors, for example. We have a huge client called Belcorp, which is a Peruvian company that has operations all over Latin America. And they have beauty consultants that they need to sign up, and they give them certain cosmetic products, which then they have to repay. So we solved a huge problem for them, because they also had a certain amount of fraud in their operations. And when you're signing a document with your face, you sort of lower the possibility for fraud. Nobody that wants to defraud you puts their face in a short video and sends you that video over electronic means. So that's a big barrier, and so we have that type of companies. We have restaurants like Fridays. We have big banks. We have industrial companies. So although we started in the fintech sector, we've grown into other types of businesses in the last few months, and especially after the coronavirus pandemic started or became a little bit more prevalent. Starting from March, we've just had a huge increase in clients of every type of business.
If you could go back to when you first started Cinepapaya, knowing everything you know today, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a great question. Perhaps going even faster. And we weren't a slow company, but sometimes we thought things too much. And I think I would now looking back, perhaps optimize for speed and optimize for customer satisfaction more than for perhaps the profits or the revenues. I think if you optimize for speed, customer satisfaction, and those types of things, you get the other things immediately. And it's not necessarily true the other way around. So yes, basically it's that. Just go faster and try to get to what really bothers your customer more immediately.
Do you have any books, blogs, podcasts, or documentaries that you like to recommend to people, whether about startups or just life in general?
Not really. I'm not that. I don't listen to podcasts that frequently. I read books, mainly history books and economic books. So I'm into that. That's what I like reading. I'm reading a very good book right now called American Colossus. I don't know if you've heard about it or not. It's the beginnings of capitalism in the U.S. from the 1800s till the 1900s. So that's pretty interesting. But no podcast to recommend actually. Just history books. That's one of my main hobbies. Besides what I'm doing right now in startups and technology, I like reading history.
Yeah, I read a bunch of the kind of early railroad and shipping magnate books maybe like 2 years ago. So that book sounds super interesting. I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah.
What's next for Keynua over the next year or two?
So right now, we're expanding into other countries. Right now, we're doing more business in Mexico than in Peru. So our main countries right now is Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So that's going to continue growing. We're also going to raise another round, perhaps by the end of the year. And we're going to expand more than just e-signatures and identity verification into a more comprehensive contract management technology as well. So we want to give our users not only the security of being able to sign documents in a very secure manner, knowing who the signer is, which is something very adapted to Latin America, but we also would like to give them a bigger array of tools for contract management in general, which is something that goes along with e-signatures at any rate as well. So that's more of the areas where we're growing into.
Well, it's going to be really fun to watch you continue to execute in LatAm, solving a huge problem that's very close to my heart. So I hope that you end up becoming the new standard for signatures in the region, and I don't have to go to the notary nearly as much anymore.
At least the experience that we provide solves that problem, and that we're going to continue to solve that problem for our clients.
Thanks again for taking the time to do the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest, Manuel Olguín. And thank you to Angel Andraca for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.